Calenhad Theirin, also known as Calenhad the Great. From Squire to King, the man who united Fereldan. If the name sounds familiar, that's because you might have heard it a few times throughout the games and other Dragon Age media. Lake Calenhad in Ferelden is one example. And as you might know, Alistair, or calling him by his full name Alistair Theirin, is one of Calenhad's descendants. Calenhad himself is also mentioned in a couple of codex entries here and there, and I've talked about him briefly in some of my previous videos. But who was he exactly? Well, if you're curious about that and want to know why people call him Calenhad the Great, grab yourself a nice warm cup of hot chocolate now that the weather's getting colder, and let me tell you all about Calenhad Theirin. Calenhad has no doubt had a very significant impact on Fereldan's history, and his actions made it into what it is today. Any Fereldan that knows their history will tell you that the great Calenhad Theirin in his silver armor traveled across the land in his quest to unite the Alamarri tribes and become King of Ferelden. As for how he was able to achieve all that, well, some say it was his honor that won the people over, and that he was simply skilled in battle. Others will say that it was the blood of a dragon that made him invincible. Either way, it all begins in 510 Exalted. Calenhad is born as the third son of a poor high-ever merchant. During this time period, the Fereldan Valley was little more than a collection of independent Arlings and Terniers, or basically what was left of the old Alamarri tribes. They would constantly war against one another, usually over petty things such as land, honor, allegiance of the freeholders, and even on one notable occasion, the name given to a favorite Mabari. However, those petty wars would eventually turn into wars of unity, and many Arls and Terrans would fight each other in order to determine who would prevail and become the nation's first king. Young Calenhad is eventually sent to a distant cousin, a poor young knight by the name of Sir Fereldan, who makes Calenhad his squire and dog handler. According to the tale, Sir Fereldan and his squire one day became caught up in one of the wars of unity. This one in particular being between Arl Murdin, a strong but generally disliked man, and Arl Tenedor, Sir Fereldan's own lord. Arl Tenedor was young, however, no older than Calenhad and a bit of a fool. Arl Murdin and his forces laid siege to Arl Tenedor's castle, and when Murdin called him out to parley, the young Tenedor asked his squires if one of them could go instead while pretending to be him. Calenhad volunteered, but instead of impersonating Arl Tenedor, he immediately revealed who he was and told Murdin that he had been asked to take the place of his lord. Murdin told Calenhad that he had intended to kill Arl Tenedor, and asked him if he was willing to die in his lord's place as well. Calenhad replied by saying that he was. This impressed Murdin, and he invited Calenhad to become his own squire, but Calenhad refused, saying that if Murdin was willing to betray the right of parley, he was no man of honor. Calenhad was allowed to return to the castle safely before Murdin launched his final assault, in which both Tenedor and Fereldan were killed. Arl Murdin himself was defeated by Calenhad in single combat. Calenhad spared his life, and in turn, Murdin pledged allegiance to him, giving him Arl Tenedor's lands and naming him Theirin. With the allegiance of Arl Murdin, Calenhad began his rise to greatness. At first, most of Murdin's allies did not agree, and they would not accept a boy commoner was to become their king. Over the years that followed, however, Calenhad would win victory over victory, and he proved himself worthy. More and more men flocked to his banner, and his reputation as a man of honor spread. Among his new allies were the famed apostate mage Aldenon, who became his chief advisor and good friend, and the legendary warrior Lady Shayna, who he also became close friends with. He married Murdin's daughter, Meryn, and his firm belief in the ways of the Chantry became the foundation of his court, and won over the rest of the faithful in Ferelden. Aldenon, however, did not believe in the Maker, and the two would often have arguments regarding the topic. By 542 Exalted, there was only one person standing in the way of Calenhad's victory in the war over Ferelden, the infamous Terran Simeon of Denerim. Simeon's forces were great, and so Aldenon suggested recruiting the Ash Warriors to their cause. Following his friend's advice, Calenhad traveled to the Brazilian forest to enlist the aid of the Ash Warriors. They weren't the only ones that he would convince to join, however. Calenhad had also managed to get the help of the Templars and the Circle Mages. The Circle Mages had crafted a special suit of silver armor for him, which is said to have been crafted using magic and drops of water from the lake we now know as Lake Calenhad, which is where it got its name from. The armor would repel both blade and arrow, as long as Calenhad stood on Fereldan soil. Calenhad returned both with the Ash Warriors and the Templars and the Circle Mages. Aldenal was furious. To him, it felt as though his friend was condoning the oppression of mages by inviting the Circle into the Rising Kingdom. He felt betrayed and left Calenhad's service. Soon after, Calenhad and his allies marched on to Denerim to face Terran Simeon. The battle was tough, but despite Aldenal's absence, Calenhad was victorious. The Ash Warriors were able to break through Simeon's lines, and even though Simeon almost managed to kill Calenhad, his good friend Lady Shayna took the blow for him and killed Simeon. Calenhad became the new Terran of Denerim, and with the allies he had gathered, he marched on to Redcliffe, where he successfully laid siege to Redcliffe Castle. Soon after, a lance meet was held, where he was crowned as the first King of Ferelden, with his wife Meryn as the first queen. So this is Ferelden's record of how Calenhad the Silver Knight, a man of honor, united the Alamarri tribes and became the first King of Ferelden. But how does that whole thing with the dragon's blood fit into all of this? Well, I will tell you about that, but first be aware of spoilers for the Dragon Age comic until we sleep. So if you haven't read that yet, cover your ears or skip ahead to the next chapter. I'll give you a second. Alright, for anyone that's still here, ready? Okay, good. So, yes, dragon's blood. You see, according to Sten, who is the new Arishok now, Calenhad's rise to power was not because he was a strong, wise man who inspired the people. The Qunari know him as a dog handler. He was clever, but he was not wise. According to Qunari legend, he was ambitious, struck bargain upon bargain, traded story for story. They say he eventually managed to get into contact with a witch, who would tell him the ways of power. The witch sent him to a cave where an old, ancient dragon lay dying. Calenhad plunged his dagger into the creature's body and drank its blood. The blood made him grow strong, and with his new power he was able to defeat anyone that would stand against him. So, which version is the truth? Well, from what I can tell, we're not really sure. In the comics, Sten tells Alistair that this is the Qunari version of Calenhad's tale, and that the dragon's blood is the reason Merrick has been captured by its Tevinter Magister that wants to use his blood to restore Tevinter back to its former glory. Because of course he does. It seems Alistair isn't sure what to believe himself, but I think the Qunari version is not unlikely. I mean, dragon's blood would explain a few things, like Fiona being cured from the taint, since it seems that dragons are resistant to the blight and all that. And I mean, there's a reason they put this in a comic, right? Anyway, this is a lore video, not a speculation video, so let's get back to Calenhad, since his story isn't quite yet over. So, after Calenhad became king, things were pretty peaceful for Ferelden. The chantry spread quickly, trade with other countries opened up, and wherever the king and queen went, crowds cheered. Unfortunately, the peace did not last. You see, Lady Shayna had been in love with Calenhad, but had kept it a secret out of honor and duty. It is said that one day she was given a love potion by a witch who turned out to be Earl Simeon's sister, seeking revenge. Shayna seduced Calenhad using the potion, but Queen Meryn discovered them together that night. She fled to her father in Denerim and told him everything. Myrddin was of course angered by this and threatened to revoke his support for Calenhad as king and start a new civil war. Lady Shayna regretted manipulating her friend with the potion and confessed that she had used forbidden magic on Calenhad in order to seduce him. Calenhad forgave her and refused to have her executed, infuriating Myrddin. Later, Lady Shayna traveled to see Meryn, alone, even though Calenhad had instructed her not to do so. But Shayna felt remorseful and wanted to ask the queen for forgiveness. But Myrddin found her first, and he killed Lady Shayna himself. Out of anger and sadness over losing his closest friend, Calenhad challenged Myrddin to a duel. Myrddin was slain. Not only had the king now lost another ally, but Myrddin's death on top of this whole situation had angered the other Earls, and the threat of a civil war loomed over the newfound kingdom. It is said that Calenhad went to see his wife one last time, though no one knows what he said to her. He left her a proclamation, which stated that he would leave his throne to his unborn son, who would later be known as King Wayland I. After that, he disappeared. It is unknown where Calenhad went, or why he left. Over the centuries, stories of him only grew. Some say he went to the Qunari wilds, or went to live with the dwarves. Others say he became a monk in a reclusive chantry order. One story in particular says that Calenhad tracked down one of Eldenon's apprentices, Mardarel the Elusive, and asked him where his former friend had gone. Mardarel initially refused to give away Aldenon's location, but after a full week of hearing Calenhad's life story, he could hear the regret in his voice. And so he gave in, and told Calenhad where his former master had gone. Calenhad thanked him, and left. Whether Calenhad ever found Aldenon, we don't know. But that was the last time anyone ever saw him. And that's the legend of Calenhad Theirin. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, let me know by liking this video. Or leave a comment and let me know if there's another character you want me to talk about. I actually think there's quite some interesting characters in the Dragon Age lore that we only ever read about in things like codex entries or other Dragon Age media. So I think it'll be fun to collect all that information and put it all in one video like I did for Calenhad just now. This way you guys don't have to read about it, and I get to ramble about cool Dragon Age characters that you might not know much about. Also, are you all excited for the Game Awards? It's very likely we'll see some Dragon Age related stuff this time. What do you guys think? I'm not gonna be able to watch it live, as it's a weekday and it'll be like 2 AM my time, and I have work the next morning. But if there's Dragon Age stuff, I will 100% watch the VOD, and in the case of a new trailer, I will watch it another 10 times and hyperanalyze every single frame like the Dragon Age nerd I am. Anyway, that's all for now though. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.